Drawing your attention to the events that unfolded in the last couple of days here in Sri Lanka, Mr. Savage, we saw the manner in which Sarat Fonseca, the former army commander, was released, was subjected to a presidential pardon on Monday. I want to know, Mr. Savage, the position of the European Union in respect of this.
Well, of course, that presidential pardon is within the prerogative of the president, as I understand Sri Lanka's constitution. As regards the different court cases, that, of course, is not appropriate for me to make a comment on the process or the conduct of criminal or other cases in the Sri Lankan judicial system.
Right. Moving on, Mr. Savage, tell me, the business climate in Sri Lanka, how do you view it at this point of time? Is it conducive for foreign investors to come to the country and invest? How does it look like at the moment?
Well, I think that there are a great many opportunities in Sri Lanka, notably, of course, in the tourist industry, which has actually seen a remarkable recovery, and there are new frontiers for tourism development, particularly in the east, particularly around Trincomalee, etc. There are a large number of visitors from the European Union who come to Sri Lanka, but there are many other areas. Sri Lanka is a middle-income country with a well-developed education system, therefore a well-educated workforce, which is in close proximity to notably the Indian market, but also other booming Asian markets, and well-placed to take advantage of those markets. But of course, we've seen a tightening of the labour market in and around the capital area, so the government is now trying to promote other poles of development, which I would say is a logical step to take. So I think the potential is there in many areas where a well-educated workforce working within a well-developed environment could take advantage of Asian economic growth.
Mr. Savage, one of the allegations levelled at the Sri Lankan government is the fact that they are not transparent with the policies for the business community over the last couple of years, especially following the end of the conflict. Your thoughts on this?
Well, I think there was a degree of concern relating to the decision made last year by the government to expropriate a number of businesses. Now, we understand how the government has argued that, but of course business perceptions are something that are not within either my control or any diplomat's control. So I've heard from the business community, not only the foreign business community but also internally, some concern about that sort of rapid policy change, and businesses are generally averse to rapid policy change, particularly if it happens without detailed explanation. Now, I'm not taking a position on government decisions, merely that what businesses most need is stability and policy and clarity in policy, because they're making long-term investments.
What changes do you want to see, Mr. Savage? We will be talking about all this and more after the short commercial break. Welcome back to Biz First in Focus. Mr. Savage, we were talking about the Expropriation Act that was implemented by the government, that was brought forward to Parliament in November last year, and it was is now enacted as an act in the Sri Lankan law. I want to know, Mr. Savage, the comments of the European Union in respect of this particular bill in question. The government is saying that they are serious about private investments, they're serious about foreign direct investors coming into Sri Lanka and investing. Does it seem like that by bringing forth an act of this nature?
Well, I mentioned the concerns of the business community. Now, first of all, I'd like to say it's not appropriate for a diplomatic mission to give advice on economic policy to another country. That's perhaps the role of the international financial institutions, the IMF, the World Bank. Having said that, I know that there was some concern in the business community. But as regards the seriousness of the government in seeking to develop through FDI and, of course, internal investment, then I don't think there's any doubt about that. But as I said earlier, we're 3 years after the conflict. There are a number of processes, particularly as regards the political solution, which will probably need to be in place in order to, if you like, open the floodgates for future investment. Businesses in general, and indeed I come from a business background myself, prize stability and clarity in policy above all else. And so as we move forward, when these things become worked out and we do have a clearer picture of a stable, peaceful Sri Lanka, then I'm sure FDI will increase by even more than it already has done.
Mr. Savage, you speak to the business community, speak to the European Union business delegations who arrive in Sri Lanka. What are their key concerns?
Well, first of all, the key concern is to identify areas for future investment. That's their key concern. Their secondary concern is the general environment in which to do business, the ability to enforce contracts in the courts, clarity as regards incentives, and as I mentioned earlier, of course, stability in the policy environment. Those are the sorts of areas that business people look at when considering investment.
Corruption is rampant. That is one of the allegations leveled by the opposition quarters of this island in respect of how business activities are taking place. Your comments on that?
Well, of course, I would refer to Transparency International, which is the, if you like, the touchstone for looking at these sorts of issues. And there, of course, there are a number of concerns. But there have been weaknesses identified, and the government is well aware of them, and I'm sure the Ministry of Economic Development is working on those areas. But that touchstone of Transparency International's assessment will of course remain important for business.
Mr. Savage, have you been able to discuss the issues that have cropped up with regard to transparency, with regard to clarity in policies? Have you been able to raise these concerns with the Minister of Economic Development or the Central Bank or the Treasury over the last couple of months?
But we do, yes. I mean, this is part of the normal interaction.
What has been the response on the part of the government?
An acknowledgement that there needs to be improvement. There's always room for improvement, as they say. And the government itself, I'm sure, would like to see greater FDI flows, and with the sorts of reports such as the World Bank's report on ease of doing business, Transparency International, these are indicators which the government certainly looks to improve in order to encourage and to provide an encouraging environment for businessmen, not only, as I would say, foreign businessmen, but also local businessmen.
Mr. Savage, you will be wrapping up operations as head of the European Union delegation in a couple of months, in 6 months or so. What is the way forward?
Well, I think the way forward has to be, of course, focused on political reconciliation. Sri Lanka has suffered enough from armed conflict, and what it needs now is to catch up on the lost years, and political reconciliation is the key to that. That it doesn't mean that everybody gets what they want, but it means a solution with which the vast majority of its populations and communities can live with. I think that is the key for a stable, peaceful future, prosperous future for Sri Lanka, which all of us want.
It has been a tough 3.5 years. You came during the height of activity in the north and east. You came during a period where the GC Plus was revoked. There was many criticism leveled by the Sri Lankan government at you, stating that you are the one who spearheaded these operations and made sure that Sri Lanka did not get the GC Plus concession as well. Now you're wrapping up operations in 6 months. What exactly would you be doing right after this mission here in Sri Lanka?
Of course, building a stable foundation for the future. Our relations with with Sri Lanka are wider than GSP Plus, wider than not momentary concerns, but specific concerns of the moment. We have a long-term relationship with the country, not with individuals. We don't take position on the political positions of individuals, and as such, we want to develop a broad range of cooperation with Sri Lanka, not only in development and hopefully in regards to humanitarian fields that will become less and less relevant, but in areas such as research and development, fisheries, business to business, and higher education, these are all areas where we can develop and for the future a wide-ranging basis for our cooperation.
After completing your 4 years here in Sri Lanka, Mr. Savage, what memories, what message would you taking back home?
Well, of course, when I arrived in Sri Lanka, we were experiencing full-scale armed conflict, terrorist attacks. There were very heated debates, and the country was certainly not in turmoil, but it was a country that was experiencing a very difficult time. Now, as we speak, 3 years later, 3.5 years later, the country is at peace for the first time in decades. Those displaced by the conflict are being resettled, and that is a process which has continued over the past few years. So the atmosphere is completely different. I mean, even physically, the country is different. Here in Colombo, to take one example, but you can see that elsewhere. I've visited, I think, every district in the country over the past 3.5 years, and the change that the simple fact of peace has brought to the country is not to be discounted. It's very important.
Thank you very much, Mr. Savage, for joining us right here on Biz First in Focus. It was a pleasure having you.
Thank you.